Let's talk about bloating. It's one of the most common and honestly most misunderstood digestive complaints out there. It can be super uncomfortable, really frustrating, and for a lot of people, it just completely messes with their quality of life. So today, we're going to dive in and decode what's really going on when you feel bloated.
You know the feeling, right? That intense pressure, that fullness that makes you just want to unbutton your pants and lie down. It's a feeling almost everyone has had. But what's actually happening? And what is our body trying to tell us?
Well, if this is you, you are definitely not alone. Not even close. It turns out bloating affects about 30% of all of us. And for people with conditions like irritable bowel syndrome or IBS, that number just skyrockets to, get this, as high as 90%. So the main takeaway here is this is an incredibly common problem. Okay, so first things first, it's really important to know there's a difference between two key terms. On one side, you have bloating. That's the feeling you get, that sensation of pressure or trapped gas inside. On the other side, you have distension. That's the visible part, when your abdomen actually gets bigger. Now, you can have one without the other, but a lot of times they show up together. This difference is super important for figuring out what's going on. So let's jump into the first big question and, maybe bust a few myths while we're at it. For literally decades, everyone just assumed that bloating was caused by having too much gas in your intestines. I mean, it makes perfect sense, right? More gas equals more pressure, which equals more bloating. But is that what the science actually shows? And here is where things get really interesting. Studies using stuff like CT scans have found something pretty shocking. A lot of people who complain about severe bloating don't actually have any more gas inside them than people who feel perfectly fine. So if it's not about the amount of gas, then what on earth is going on? Well, the reality is a whole lot more complex. The feeling of being bloated comes from a mix of things. It could be that gas is just moving too slowly through your system, or maybe you're not getting rid of it efficiently. It could be from your gut bacteria fermenting the food you eat, or even some wonky reflexes between your diaphragm and your ab muscles. And very often a big piece of the puzzle is an imbalanced gut microbiome, something called dysbiosis. This brings us to probably the most important concept of all: visceral hypersensitivity. Just imagine that the nerves in your gut have a volume knob. For people with this condition, that knob is turned all the way up to 11. So normal stuff, like a normal amount of gas or the normal movements of digestion, things other people wouldn't even feel, are perceived as intense pressure, pain, and, you guessed it, bloating. And listen to this quote from Dr. Brian Lacey at the Mayo Clinic, because it just nails it. He says, "The problem often isn't the physical event, but how the nervous system perceives that event. And that idea leads us to an even bigger picture." You see, this whole thing isn't just happening in your gut. Nope. It involves a constant back and forth conversation with your brain. This is what scientists call the gut-brain axis. And you can think of it like a superhighway of information going in both directions. What's happening in your gut can totally affect your mood and brain function, and what's happening in your brain, things like stress and anxiety, can directly mess with your gut. And they talk to each other in a bunch of different ways. You've got the vagus nerve, which is like a direct fiber optic cable connecting the two. You have your gut microbes, which are little factories producing neurotransmitters like serotonin. You have immune cells acting like messengers, and of course, hormones that regulate everything. It's this incredibly complex, interconnected network. So here's why this matters so much. Stress isn't just in your head. It can physically change how your gut works. It can slow things down, change your microbiome, and ramp up that visceral hypersensitivity we just talked about. This creates a terrible, vicious cycle. You feel bloated, so you get anxious about it. And then that anxiety makes the bloating even worse. Okay, so this all sounds kind of complicated, right? A sensitive gut, the brain getting involved, but there's good news. If the gut's volume is turned up too high, it makes sense to try and reduce the noise. And that often starts with food. So let's talk about one of the most effective, science-backed ways to do that. Say hello to FODMAPs. It's a weird-sounding acronym, I know, but it stands for a group of small carbohydrates that our bodies find really hard to digest. So, since we don't absorb them, they travel down to the large intestine, where our gut bacteria see them and basically throw a party. This fermentation process produces gas, and it also pulls extra water into the gut. For someone with an already sensitive system, that combo of gas and water is the perfect storm for bloating. So does cutting back on them actually work? Oh yeah, the evidence is pretty stunning. Major studies show that a low FODMAP diet can bring serious relief to up to 75% of people with IBS. It's honestly one of the most powerful tools we have for dealing with these kinds of gut issues.
But, and this is so important to understand, it is not a forever diet. It's a 3-step diagnostic process. First, you eliminate all the high FODMAP foods for a few weeks. Then, step 2, you carefully and systematically reintroduce them one by one to figure out which specific ones are your personal triggers. And finally, the goal is to create a personalized, balanced diet where you only avoid the things that actually bother you.
Now, because this is pretty complex and that first phase is restrictive, I really can't stress this enough. It is highly recommended that you do this with a trained dietitian. They can make sure you're still getting all the right nutrients and help you navigate the reintroduction part so you get clear, accurate results. Please don't try to just wing it on your own. All right, so we've covered a lot about what's normal and how to manage it. But now we need to talk about something really crucial. Knowing when you're bloating might be a sign of something more serious. This chart might look a little intimidating, but it gives you a peek into how a doctor thinks about chronic bloating. It's a step-by-step process, and you can see that the very first thing they do is look for any warning signs or red flags to rule out more serious conditions. Only after that's clear do they move on to investigating other causes. And these are the red flags we're talking about. I want you to really pay attention here. If your bloating is constant and it comes along with any of these symptoms, like losing weight without trying, a big change in your bathroom habits, severe pain, or blood in your stool, it is time to stop guessing and go see a doctor. It's so important to get a proper diagnosis and make sure it's not a sign of something else. Please don't ignore these signals. So at the end of the day, bloating isn't just some random, annoying inconvenience. It's a form of communication. It's this really complex signal that's being shaped by your food, your nervous system, your gut bugs, and even your stress levels. Understanding that is the first step to actually managing it. So the real question is, what is your gut trying to tell you?